Greetings and welcome to another episode of I'm Ready, a SpongeBob SquareCast. My name is Captain Eric, and we are continuing our sail through the second season of SpongeBob SquarePants. For those who have been following our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, we are finally about to be up to date with all of the SquareCast, all of the This Week in Nickelodeon episodes. It is finally happening, and once everything is caught up, I will be dropping more video-specific content. So follow us on YouTube. I've actually changed the YouTube channel over to just being Captain Eric, since I will be featuring a bit more video content on there above just the podcast. So if you would like to see more out of what I make in terms of Nickelodeon content, video, and otherwise, follow me over on the Captain Eric YouTube channel. Links for all of that will be in the podcast description below. Joining me on this week's episode of the SquareCast is my good friend Colin. Colin moved up here from Georgia to the Northeast about 2 years ago to further his education, and while he has spent time up here working, going to school, we've also spent a fair amount of time talking about entertainment, what we like, what we dislike. We've bonded a ton over a bunch of different things in entertainment, including SpongeBob SquarePants. So I knew before he continued his path alongside his career, he would have to come aboard and be a part of the SquareCast, at least for one episode. So please enjoy this wonderful conversation I have with my good friend Colin. We talk about everything with SpongeBob. We get into some Krusty Love, and we just have an overall wonderful conversation. So it was an absolute honor to have him on board, and I just know that whatever he does out there in the world is going to be greatly beneficial to every person that comes across his path. So best of luck with everything you decide to do with your career, Colin. Can't wait to see what you do, friend, and we'll make sure to get you on a future episode. But before we get into today's episode of Krusty Love, we're going to take a quick break, and when we get right back, we'll hop right into the episode.
Scrumptious, curvy cutie.
I see her, Mr. Krabs. A Krabby Patty with cheese. The classic.
Not the sandwich boy, the curvy cutie holding the sandwich.
Hey, that's my driving teacher, Mrs. Puff.
Magic Conj, will I ever get to meet Tom Kenny?
Maybe someday.
Oh, so you're saying there's a chance. Okay. Should I tell fans of the show how they can support us?
Yes.
Goofy Goobers, supporting the show is shockingly easier than catching a blue jellyfish. Right from our Anchor page, anchor.fm/SpongePod, you can find links to all of our social media and a support button if you happen to have a few extra clams. Also follow us on twitch.tv/SpongeBobPodcast, where it's not only the official home to our sister show, Video Bob Game Pants, it's also where I stream live drawings of various Nickelodeon characters and host the opportunity for commissions and giveaways. Lastly, the official merchandise store is now open at redbubble.com/people/SpongePod, where various designs will be uploaded inspired by our show, including our official logo, which is now available on a multitude of products like t-shirts, stickers, duvet covers, and even a shower curtain. This is a podcast by a fan, for fans, and will always be fan-driven. Any way you see fit on supporting our show is much appreciated. Thank you, and enjoy.
You want me to run down to the store and buy Mrs. Puff something she doesn't need, then you want me to run back here so you can say, "Arr, SpongeBob, and you're spending all me money." And then I'll say, "But Mr. Krabs, I'm only doing what you said." Then you'll say, "We're not talking about this or this, we're talking about this."
It's all about that Krusty Love. I don't know about you, but whatever you take away from that, it's all about you, baby.
We talking crustaceans.
Crustaceans and blowfish, apparently. I'm joined today by my good friend Colin, who is not making his podcast debut, but is making his SpongeBob podcast debut, I reckon. Absolutely. I don't think you've been on any other SpongeBob podcasts.
This is the first and this is the best one. Absolutely.
That's what I love hearing, my friend. Man, so today we were talking about Krusty Love, the second part to the 36th episode of SpongeBob SquarePants, first premiering on September 6th, 2002. Now, you and I, over the last couple of years, have had many conversations about what we loved watching when we were kids, growing up, our childhoods,
yes.
Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network. But I'm going to ask you here, what's your earliest memories of SpongeBob? Did you watch SpongeBob as a kid, or is it something you found as an adult?
Nah, man, SpongeBob is something that has been with me and my sisters since day one. In fact, that's probably the first show that we would get together and watch, make sure that we caught the episodes and everything. I remember my first ever episode was the pizza delivery. And
Oh,
I
what
went
an episode
around
to start with.
beatboxing for so long because of that episode. I mean, it was so great. The dances, the tornadoes, all of it, just wrapped in just joy.
I can't believe you started out with that though. That's an incredible episode to start out with for
Hey, man,
SpongeBob.
it really was. It really was. And from then on, I just got that SpongeBob addiction, and here I am. The only episodes I haven't seen are the ones that just came out. It feels like.
Yeah, and you said your family also watched SpongeBob, and even together, you guys through the pandemic would get together and have like regular movie nights where you'd watch movies and TV shows. And I think you mentioned SpongeBob was thrown in the rotation somewhere in there.
Absolutely, man. In fact, around when the quarantine started, we probably went through about 3 seasons straight of SpongeBob. We were watching an episode or 2 every night.
See, I love hearing that. It's certainly, the first few seasons are certainly bingeable. I'm sure the later seasons, when we get to them here in the show, I'll discover that out for myself. But I could watch those original seasons like on repeat all day, every day.
Absolutely, man. Taught me how to tie my shoes. Taught me how to fight off nematodes. It's been great.
Taught you how to be a good noodle.
A good noodle, bro. That's what's most important. Got to get those stars.
You got to wake up in the morning and achieve those stars that life hands you.
Absolutely.
That's called just karma right there.
It really is. I mean, look, what was it? They did everything they could for the egg. Mr. Puff saw it, and she was happy to give them the star because she knew they were good folk. That's all it takes, man.
What's your favorite cartoon that you had as a kid? Like, is it different than what you've eventually grown up to love?
Believe it or not, a lot of my childhood cartoons have still carried weight with me to this day. But, I grew up in the prime time of cartoons. We had Ed, Edd, and Eddy. We had SpongeBob. We had Jimmy Neutron. We had the OG Fairly Odd Parents. All of those, man, they just brought so many great memories. So many great movies.
Firing on cylinders, too. Both, really, I know everybody has their preference on Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network, but there's this good 5 to 6 year span that if you were watching either or, you couldn't go wrong because there was just gold on both networks.
Absolutely, man. Even the old school Disney stuff, man. Disney XD, all that. They had the Jackie Chan Adventures. They had Kick Buttowski, American Dragon, Jake Long. Man, I loved it.
I liked American Dragon, Jake Long, and I love the Proud Family, which I'm glad is coming back too.
Absolutely, man.
American Dragon Jake Long should come back too, and a lot of people turned down that the animation style change for the second season, but I really thought that with that animation change and the writing change, they finally found their footing as a show.
Absolutely, man. It really took off after the first season. The first season was kind of enough to get you to wonder about what's going to happen. Wonder about how is the rest of the show going to play out. And then the second season they came in revamped, fresh, and just hit you where it was great. You know what I'm saying? It was a solid show.
Where does SpongeBob fit in? Now, I'm sure your parents were well aware of everything, most of the things you guys were into, or 100%. At least TV shows, movies. Where does SpongeBob land for them? Was he on the annoying scale for them, or was he passable? Was it just...
In fact, SpongeBob was probably the most tolerable cartoon show we had. It didn't have too much, boogers and snot like that, like Grim Adventures and stuff. So my parents,
I was really thinking Billy and Mandy. They probably might have not wanted.
And
around.
it also didn't have the whole, talking of idiots and stuff like that. That may have came with Ed, Edd, and Eddy. It was always light. A lot of the jokes that maybe I wouldn't get as a child. My parents knew that I wouldn't get them as a child, but I would still be able to laugh at them.
Right.
So it was great. They didn't really mind it. It was one show that they would be like, hey, you know what? We'll throw SpongeBob on for you. In fact, it was my 6th birthday. One of the best toys I've ever gotten in my life. It was a SpongeBob animatronic toy where you would push the button and he would give different quips, or he would start singing random SpongeBob songs. Played with that thing until the batteries inside of it died out.
Dude, SpongeBob had some of the best toys from the original run and everything. There's some good classic toys there that are still functional to this day and still worthwhile tracking down.
Absolutely, man. I mean, it was SpongeBob really, it's what got me into cartoons, and it's definitely what helped me stay in cartoons.
Yeah, and 20 years later, still kicking, and we're gonna be here celebrating SpongeBob's 30th because I can't see some of these shows reaching 30 and then SpongeBob fizzling out before then. I mean,
no way.
Even with all of these spinoffs, I don't think it's ever gonna deter classic SpongeBob being a thing on television that people want to see.
SpongeBob will last for generations, primarily because parents, you know, when we become parents and stuff like that, we know SpongeBob's an okay show for us to throw on for our kids, you know, because you know what? One, we're going to watch the episodes with them. So now you've got that bond created. And two, it's just something that everybody has to experience. The dynamic of each character, what they represent. I mean, really, I don't want to get too deep into it, but you know, SpongeBob is great. It really hits you with all the angles that you need, and it doesn't overwhelm you at all.
It's truly timeless, and it is something that's absolutely right. That generational part where one generation will grow up with something and then they want to share that with their kids. I mean, my mother did that to an extent with movies that she loved, and I'm sure your parents did that to an extent with like, hey, I really enjoyed this when I was your age, and I want to show it to you and see how you enjoy it.
Absolutely, man. I mean, what I look like watching I Love Lucy, but I can tell you I've probably seen well over 30 episodes.
Oh my goodness, Fred and Ethel living next door. I know I know that stuff by the back of my hand.
Yeah.
Nick at Night with my mother was what we got like bonded over.
Man.
Like, she would sit through Rugrats, but then the Nick at Night stuff is what she really got into, and then I was able to see that and go, okay, I want to get into it too because my mom was into it.
Exactly, man. And I think that's the kind of set that we're gonna have with SpongeBob. You know, there's no way, especially I know myself, when I have kids, there's no way that I'm not gonna get excited during SpongeBob episodes, and they're gonna see that, you know. And then I'm hoping that's what sparks, you know, what got you so excited, and then here we are having dinner, chopping it up, talking about SpongeBob.
See, that's what it's all about. It's just about bringing us together. It's kind of the point of this podcast, really. Talking about SpongeBob is the secondary part. It is really just about meeting new people. There's glue that brings us together called entertainment, because there's always something in entertainment you can find that people like. You can find two radically different people that have completely different political views. I'm sure you can find a TV show or a movie that they both really dig and that they could have like an hour-long conversation talking over.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm in complete agreement. You know, like you said, you know, entertainment is that bridge. You know, you can walk out of a conversation knowing, hey, you know what, we may have different views, but I know that guy's thinking right because he watches that show. You know,
yeah.
And you can,
it's why I love movie theaters so much, and that's why like I never fear about movie theaters going away, because I think there's enough people like me who feel that camaraderie with a broad audience that you have no idea names, backgrounds, none of that matters. The lights go off. You're just all there viewing the same movie, laughing at the same parts, crying at the same parts. You walk out at the same time together. Stuff like that is fantastic. And especially when you have SpongeBob, which has now reached 20 years and has reached multiple generations. Like, now we have multiple people that know about this show across the world. You could wear a SpongeBob shirt, travel all the way over to a country where you don't even speak the same language, and you're guaranteed to run into a kid or an adult who knows who SpongeBob is and can point to that and go and put a smile on their face.
Absolutely, man. I mean, speaking of movie theaters, one of the best movies I saw in theaters was the SpongeBob movie, man. I remember I was so young. My Nana took me, and the scene, you know, the dreadful scene where everybody thought they dried out underneath the lamp. Yeah. I mean, it was me, bunch of other kids, some parents who gasped. I mean, we gasped in the movie theater over that one scene. Yeah, and then we cheered as hard as the Pirates.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was crazy, man. It was great. You know, and like those kind of experiences, like you said, you know, we're all going into one place. We're like, hey, you know what? We're going to all share this emotional experience, whether it's laugh, cries, anger. It doesn't matter, because you know what? You're walking out of that theater, you go up to a stranger that you were in that movie with and be like, hey, man, what you think of the movie? And boom, you just had a great connection right then based on a movie that y'all just happened to see together.
Yeah. That's what's really special about our culture, and pretty much all cultures, because everyone's got movie theaters. Every country's got movie theaters, televisions to an extent, and we can all, the idea of sitting around and watching something together and finding that enjoyment. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the videos where there's countries where there might be like one TV in town and they all get together to watch the Olympics or the World Cup, and something big happens and that moment is captured where everybody is crowded around that one screen and everybody cheers. I mean, look, that has nothing to do with SpongeBob, but at the same time, like, the fact that we're all looking to just be entertained, and eventually you're just going to run into somebody that finds that same entertainment and finds some common ground. It's kind of what's really nice about it.
It really is, man, and it's reassuring. You know, it feels good.
Yeah,
it's just nice. You know, it's like, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, you know, we're humans and we can still have great interactions like this, even if we don't know each other. You know, so it's real nice. But you know, SpongeBob's a true connection, man.
Is a true connection. Now, as far as this episode goes, this This is a new venture for a lot of these characters because this is the first episode in which Mrs. Puff is a central character that her driving school has no bearing on the plot whatsoever. And we're also seeing Mr. Krabs in a dating sense, which for the entire series, we've known that Mr. Krabs has a daughter, but is divorced or widowed or likewise, but is not seeing anybody and doesn't really seem interested in the sort until this episode. It's a really interesting dynamic to go down, Mr. Krabs being the romantic, and especially Mrs. Puff of all characters being on the other side of that. And put yourself in SpongeBob's shoes. Imagine, if you will, your boss being interested in your teacher.
Right.
You know?
I mean, on that note, shout out to SpongeBob for being the ultimate wingman.
Yeah.
Zero hesitation.
Set it up, zero hesitation.
The minute he found out that his boy was loving the girl that he knew, he was like, let me set that up for you. Without hesitation. It's just so great.
He even was there to mention that when Mr. Krabs got upset that she might be taken due to her having the suffix Mrs.
Right.
No, SpongeBob is there to remind him, no, she's single.
Right. Like, she is definitely on the market.
But we do get the harrowing scene of the fact that Mr. Puff at some point was taken out of the ocean and as pictured in the SpongeBob movie was made into a sun-dried appliance of some sort of light electronic.
Right. And, I think that little scene is a great, expression of how great SpongeBob can be. Even in all that, they still hint back to the fact that, hey, these are creatures under the water. The world around them still exists.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like
it's
bad
not
stuff
just
still
Bikini
happens.
Bottom. And like it was with the imported musician. They had a scuba diver down there. So you're seeing already two connections of human life and human reaction outside of Bikini Bottom and in Bikini Bottom, yet it still manages to focus on the sea creatures themselves.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, Shell City, which was the sun-dried drop, the sun-dried shop, and I think on a pier, or at least there was a pier near it. It was on the beach where you could just go in and buy dried out fish in little fun arrangements and whatnot. If you go back and watch, there is a puffer fish that is fixated as a light in that shop.
Right.
Now, is that Mr. Puff? I'm not entirely sure, but it would be interesting if it was.
No, I wouldn't deny that it is, because the only kind of thing that we saw of Mr. Puff was, like you said, he was a light fixture and he appeared to be a hanging light fixture. And those kind of things can easily be swapped onto lamps, can be swapped onto other things.
Right,
so,
right.
If he's acting as though just being the bulb, I could definitely see that being him inside of old Shell City.
I've always, in my opinion, I think it is him because it's such a good callback to that moment. Here we are in season 2, and the idea that sea creatures, like sun-dried sea creatures, exist, which I don't think for a lot of kids knew that about like souvenir shops.
No way.
Watching this episode. You probably only know about those things if you live near a shore or you go into those souvenir shops and they happen to have those kind of items.
Right, man. And, this is another instance of them highlighting, again, the dangers that's in Bikini Bottom. Because you had the episode with the hooks. What happened with Patrick? You have all the other situations where, people come back in tuna cans, and that kind of juxtaposition is crazy, because it's like, hey, these are the real dangers that affect sea creatures, and they're also just trying to live their life, so it's crazy. And I think that's unique to SpongeBob itself and that kind of show.
They can take a dark comedy route with some of these moments, and it's always eye-opening a little bit, because I don't think kids would ever think about the idea that fish, especially that moment in the movie, like the idea that fish would be taken out of the water, dried out, and then made into fixtures and just funny little dioramas.
Googly eyes on them
eyes.
and stuff
Yeah,
like
just
that.
crazy stuff. Now, of course, Mr. Krabs, we get a really funny scene of him trying to talk to Mrs. Puff unsuccessfully, to the point that SpongeBob has to basically interpret his gibberish as him trying to ask Mrs. Puff out on a date, which, hey, look, kudos to SpongeBob. Even though he says some pretty funny things before then, he eventually gets to the right answer. But it's adorable. It's adorable to see a character that up to this point is so prideful, so boastful, just fall into himself as he's trying to talk to a pretty girl.
Absolutely. And in that scene, we saw every wrong guess was like crushing Mr. Krabs, because Mrs. Puff would give a not so
hit
great
you with a
reaction.
rake?
Yeah, like, he wants to guess your weight, and they're all like the things that, they almost say you should never say to women,
Yeah, you would not want to say
never
that
wanna
to
say
a
what
girl
your
you
weight,
like
stuff
or
like that.
anyone you like,
And
for that matter.
it's so funny because you see the desperation in Mr. Krabs of trying to get to the date, but he just cannot get it out. It's crazy.
Eventually, we get it out. She agrees to a date to Mr. Krabs.
Mm-hmm.
She definitely is attracted to him. And they go out to this fancy restaurant, which if you weren't sure of it being fancy, then you should just take a look at the name of the restaurant, which is literally fancy.
Right.
With an exclamation point.
To let you know that it's fancy.
And I like that it's a ship in a bottle. Like, I can see people sitting in a room going, okay, we have to make a fancy restaurant under the ocean. What are they walking into? Like, what is the fanciest thing that could fall from the surface world that could be made into a restaurant? A ship in a bottle. It's kind of ironic.
It is, man. It is. And because, what do you look at when you see a ship in a bottle? The details, the difficulty of making it. And of course, for it to be the most high-end restaurant, it just kind of fits. It makes sense that something so hard to make and to achieve would be the highest end restaurant for them,
Yeah.
High end it was.
Mr. Krabs pulled out all the stops to make sure that this evening was one to remember, including getting some foreign music, which, by the way, you mentioned the sea diver. We get a live action diver playing the piano, although he's not adorned with any scuba gear other than literally just a snorkel and a mask.
Talk about breath control, man.
Talk about breath control. That man is wonderful. He's got it under control. But we get this really funny scene where Mr. Krabs gets a bill for $100 and flips out, which then turns out to be the wrong bill, and he gets the right one, which I think was worth $100,000. $100,000. Now, I have been to some fancy restaurants, and I've been to some restaurants that I would say are low-end fancy, the ones that are like the restaurants you would only go to a couple times a year because it's a little bit more expensive than your average restaurant, but it's not like
pricey.
Super fancy. You can still walk in with jeans and a t-shirt, kind of like the Cheesecake Factory.
Right,
That's what I'm getting
yeah.
at. But if I went to the Cheesecake Factory, a dinner for two, and I pulled out all the stops and they handed me a bill for $100, I am not saying a word.
Right, that's a good date.
That's a good date. You're telling me you went to the fanciest restaurant, Bikini Bottom, and it only cost you $100 for two people, and you're gonna yell about that?
See, but what's so great about that is in the beginning of the episode, we get to see him freaking out over a penny.
Yes, he does. The gag in which he is able to, mind you, from his office, he is able to sniff out or know that there's a penny missing in the drawer.
Right.
He's able to pick up the drawer and through holding and sniffing it is able to know exactly the amount is in there. That's impressive.
Impressive, man. Impressive.
That's
and nobody
impressive.
even bats an eye at it. It's just expected,
He's a human money scale because on those things that they know exactly by weight, what you're putting on them.
Right.
Man, Mr. Krabs there. Jeez. But
yeah.
yeah, a penny, he's crying over it.
And then here he is, $100,000 on a date.
Yeah, he deserves it for complaining about $100.
Just a little bit,
fully.
man.
Karma. Just karma on his part.
I mean, he had a whole limo. He had massages during dinner.
Oh yeah, mid-meal massages,
Right,
or mid-course massages.
Mid-course.
There's a little character under the table massaging Mrs. Puff's feet. That's incredible. Fancy restaurant. $100. He was complaining about it. What a guy. What a guy. Now, of course, after having spending $100,000 on a dinner date, goes to SpongeBob the next morning and is completely upset about this. Apparently, now he makes it seem like it's a lot of his, or it's all of his money, but then he leads on that there's a rest of it. There's still a chunk of his money. Dude, this guy is more loaded than he gives on because it seems like every purchase should be the one that kills him, like puts him in the red, but then somehow he still has money for the next purchase.
Still has money for the next purchase, man.
So I don't know how much money he legitimately has, but
it's hard to scale because, he's so stingy and he's so greedy that, he makes a $1 bill look like it's $1,000. So it's hard to kind of gauge. But I mean, as we'll find out later in the podcast when we talk about the rest of the episode, he gets pretty quick with tossing the money around.
He does. Now he brings SpongeBob. They have a wonderful date the night of the fancy restaurant. So nice, in fact, that they decide to plan another date the next night. But of course, they're fine with making it a more lighter date, a more reasonable date for your wallet, a nice walk in the park.
A nice walk in the park.
A nice walk, even a first date would be reasonable, a nice walk, just to be able to talk and get to know somebody. You don't really need to go to a fancy dinner for your first date, but Mr. Krabs is really trying to impress Mrs. Puff here.
Pulls out all the stops, man. Pulls them all out. Again, you see the great wingman of SpongeBob. What does he do? He gives up his whole day to be Mr. Krabs' financial advisor.
He has a day off from the Krusty Krab, a day where he doesn't have to see this guy. And this guy shows up at his house, complains about the amount of money he spent, and inquires that SpongeBob tag along with them on their date just to make sure that he doesn't spend money. But of course, SpongeBob is probably the worst character to get for this situation, because while he respects Mr. Krabs and wants to keep his wallet safe, he also respects Mr. Krabs and wants to buy him everything that he asks for, because at the end of the day, it's his money and it's his boss, and I mean, he's getting conflicting information here. So we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves, though, because now that they showed up to Mrs. Puff's house, a few key moments during their conversation here, Mr. Krabs picks up on and decides that he needs to purchase literally anything that Mrs. Puff mentions possibly needing, even if it's something that she already owns.
Exactly. It's like he doesn't even hear her say, no, don't do it, because in his mind, buying it is the best way to earn favor. And he is still thinking that this is all a reach, that he's having to close this gap between him and Mrs. Puff.
Yeah.
So what's the fastest way to do it? Shower them in gifts.
Well, people have different ways in showing their love. Some people are very vocal. Some people are very physical. Some people like purchasing gifts.
Right.
I'm that kind of person. If I want to show you how much I care about you, I want to get you a gift that wasn't just quickly purchased at a store, but something that might have some meaning behind it if it is quickly purchased at a store. Like, either way, like, there was thought put behind that gift.
Exactly, man. And I get that. I'm definitely one, they say, the words of affirmation. I love the flowery speech, to say what I feel, to let you know, and that's, I kind of look like what we were getting in the episode. Mrs. Puff, every time she tried to say what she do or tried to say how she felt, Mr. Krabs would hear that and receive it as, let me get you a gift.
Yeah.
So it was just a simple case of people trying to express love, but that misunderstanding getting in the way.
Well, his life revolves around money.
Right. His two loves, right?
His two loves. And in his world, receiving money, receiving gifts is the greatest thing ever. So, of course, his idea of how to show love would be to shower someone in gifts.
Absolutely.
He does this with his daughter. He does this with Mrs. Puff. At their beck and whim, whatever they want, he gets them, because he knows on his end, when he gets gifts, it's the greatest thing in the world. Or if he decides to steal them, like we have found out in previous episodes, when he really wants something. I actually have a full list of everything that Mr. Krabs ends up buying Mrs. Puff. I don't have an exact dollar amount here, but some of these things we can bring up. He starts out with flowers,
right?
Which, you know what, justified. SpongeBob is very justified in this situation, because it is a very cheap gift to get. It is a nice start to a date, especially a nice walk in the park. So,
right,
a set of flowers, not that bad. The next thing is a box of chocolates.
The biggest box of chocolates.
Well, see, that's where SpongeBob done messed up, because, to be fair, I don't think anyone asked for the biggest box. He just asked for a box of chocolates. He didn't have to go buy the biggest. So Mr. Krabs, I think, in that one is justified in being angry with SpongeBob.
Right, because he didn't even react too much when he brought the flowers to him.
Yeah, he just handed him right over, and then that was it. And then he was like, "Oh, and here's your box of chocolates."
Right.
And that's when he was wrong. The first big item here, though, is a sun hat, which Mrs. Puff, that was the first item she mentioned that she wanted to grab a hat. She has one already. She didn't need a new one. But Mr. Krabs gets these love-sickened eyes with hearts in the middle of them, and just becomes blinded by the fact that he's just spending needless money at this point.
Exactly. He heard, I need a hat, and that's all he wants. He wants to be the fixer. He wants to be the go-get-it for her.
The next bit of amount, like this guy spends a lot of money. We have a fur coat, a pair of shoes, fine jewelry, an umbrella, a bicycle.
Right.
We're gonna stop there for a second because a bike is not expensive. That's at least 150 bucks.
At least.
An umbrella is not, hey,
It looked like a pretty
25 bucks.
fancy umbrella.
Fine jewelry, I'm guessing at least $100 there. Shoes and a fur coat, not inexpensive items. A surfboard.
Yeah.
I'm kind of questioning what Mrs. Puff could have possibly said that made Mr. Krabs go bicycle and surfboard.
Right. I have no idea what the correlation could have been.
A grandfather clock. That's an expensive item, depending on
expensive.
what kind of grandfather clock. An anchor weight.
Yeah, I noticed that. It looked like it was 2 anchors on a bar. I was
Yeah.
like, you got her workout equipment?
Yeah, she must have mentioned something about needing to get stronger. A television.
Yeah.
She got a TV out of the deal. A canopy bed.
Yeah, because she was sitting on it outside.
Once again, those are 2 very expensive gifts: an entire television and a canopy bed. Golf clubs, a teddy bear, an inner tube, a bowling ball. See, now we've gone from really expensive, fancy, gaudy items to just really weird, off-putting, like...
Where do you even get the idea to buy these kind of items?
Golf clubs. Let's see. A teddy bear, an inner tube, a bowling ball, a baseball, a dartboard with 3 darts, a sink and faucet, a plant, a table, a washing machine, a toaster with some bread, a beach ball, a glass, at least 8 books including a dictionary, a stereo system, a crown, a ruby, and random wrapped presents. Gifts that we don't get to see.
SpongeBob probably carried about 20 just wrapped presents back and forth. It was remarkable.
We get this wonderful sequence that you have to, I think, on second or third viewing, you'll catch on. But if you ever watch this scene again, pay attention to the inflection of Mr. Krabs changing every time SpongeBob comes back and leaves and comes back and leaves, and it's just, there's desperation and anger and so much emotion coming through. We eventually get to see Mrs. Puff adorned with all of these gifts and treasures in front of her home. She is very overwhelmed by this amount of gifts, and at this point it's crazy that she's just still standing there
still accepting
gifts. Being like, not telling him to stop at any point, seeing that he keeps asking SpongeBob to leave.
But you know what, to be fair, she probably did try to stop, but I mean, Mr. Krabs showed off the bat that he was just not hearing the word no. All he knew was
not
gifts.
in his vocabulary.
And I know on that, I'd like to highlight how SpongeBob even broke the little sequence to say, Mr. Krabs, like, you're here, you got me here to stop you from spending money, but then you give me these really confusing rules and confusing demands, so here I go spending your money and you get mad at me. How do I win? How do I appease this? And what does he get? He gets sent for more money, for more items.
Right back on the hamster wheel, keep running through. Eventually, though, Mrs. Puff does step in. She just finally has enough and says, she can't really accept all of these gifts. It's uncomfortable for her. But she's also a fairly well-off woman as well, owning her own business in town.
Absolutely.
Seemingly owning the only boning school in Bikini Bottom, so
right.
She's pretty well off. She ends up paying Mr. Krabs for all of the items. At least we don't get to see the exact amount, but he seems happy with what he's being handed. So I'm assuming she kind of paid for at least a good chunk.
Right. And Colin, going back to what you said, he's so enthralled with the idea of giving gifts and receiving gifts that when she was just even willing to show, hey, you know what, let's try to balance this out, at least let me kind of pay for some of it, he went eyes over. Eyes made a heart. He was so in love.
That's her showing love back. It wasn't a kiss, it wasn't a hug, it wasn't her saying, hey, I like you, it wasn't a compliment. It was her handing him money, which put him over the moon. So it's super in line with the character and just a lot deeper, if you will. I can imagine that while this episode was being written, they were having discussions about maybe how the characters have, accept, how they show love and accept love and how they would, do in this situation and whatnot. How would Mr. Krabs do if he saw a woman he really was attracted to?
Right.
And we got our answer.
We did. And, obviously, my favorite part is when SpongeBob finally, you get the straw that breaks the camel's back where SpongeBob just can't take any more of the running back and forth, the upsetting, but also making Mr. Krabs happy to where the point where it is, you know what, he just kind of snaps, you know, and I think that kind of serves as a good inclination for Mrs. Puff to see, wow, maybe this has gotten a little too far, you know, maybe it is time for me to step in here, because if SpongeBob, the nice, happy-go-lucky, always smiling guy, can get to that level of upset and anger, you know, maybe that's an indication that we need to calm things down a little bit.
Well, they continue their relationship off and on as the show goes on. If anything, I think she may have been attracted to Mr. Krabs in that moment because she dislikes SpongeBob so much that if there's anyone out there that can rile SpongeBob up to the point that he's seemingly spitting obscenities out in the air,
right,
obscenities that she may have not heard of because she pulled out a dictionary to look up.
And even at one point blushed saying, oh my goodness. Like,
yeah.
It was unbelievable.
She might have like been more attracted to Mr. Krabs at that point because of that situation. Because like, oh, you upset him,
right?
I've been trying to get rid of him like that for years. You
right.
just did it once, so. And their relationship is cute and it is adorable. It's nice to have these characters, and it's not a relationship that is ever really a focal point in the show. Like once in a while, it's nice to look in and see how this relationship is doing, or we'll get an episode about Mr. Krabs and Mrs. Puff's, you know, what their adventures are going on. But I've always enjoyed it. It's just adorable, and we get to see it start here.
Absolutely, man. You know, you get to see essentially two widowed people go back into the date market for the first time and how they go about doing that. And it's so raw and natural that you can't help but think that this is truly how they felt. You know, this is truly how they express themselves. Because like Mr. Krabs said in the beginning, he's like, man, it's been a long time since I've stepped out, you know? So this is all almost essentially new for him.
Yeah, yeah. We don't know really how long it has been for either character, unless
right.
it's been just roughly mentioned about their single years, but yeah, it's really adorable and sweet, and I think in the end they both walk away better for it happening. And like I said, it's something that continues being kind of worked on through the show as the years go on.
Right, you know, you get to see it end on a happy note, you know, and that's always great.
That is always great. I just want to give credit to the writers of this episode, Doug Lawrence, Jay Lender, and William Reese. Colin, my friend, thank you for joining me on
Thanks
this
for
episode
having me, man.
of the podcast.
I've been looking forward to it.
You're leaving the north soon, heading back down south.
Yes, sir.
The good old southern states. And I do, man, thank you for being a part of my life up here for the last few years. And I can't wait till the next time our paths cross.
It goes both ways, man. I appreciate you. You've definitely helped make this northern experience better. You know, I came up here not knowing anybody, not knowing a single thing. And you really kind of opened up your arms, and you became such a great friend and older brother that it just made it smooth, you know, made the transition smooth. And it's definitely great to be able to keep in touch. Glad you had me out here, man. It's been a great experience.
Absolutely, man. Till next time, my friend.
Till next time, guys.
Magic Conj, will I ever get to meet Tom Kenny?
Maybe someday.
Oh, so you're saying there's a chance. Okay. Should I tell fans of the show how they can support us?
Yes.
Goofy Goobers, supporting the show is shockingly easier than catching a blue jellyfish. Right from our anchor page, anchor.fm/SpongePod, you can find links to all of our social media and a support button if you happen to have a few extra clams. Also follow us on twitch.tv/SpongeBobPodcast, where it's not only the official home to our sister show, Video Bob Game Pants, it's also where I stream live drawings of various Nickelodeon characters and host the opportunity for commissions and giveaways. Lastly, the official merchandise store is now open at redbubble.com/people/SpongePod, where various designs will be uploaded inspired by our show, including our official logo, which is now available on a multitude of products like t-shirts, stickers, duvet covers, and even a shower curtain. This is a podcast by a fan, for fans, and will always be fan-driven. Any way you see fit on supporting our show is much appreciated. Thank you, and enjoy.